Hi guys, this is the Unit 5 Lesson 2 video. We're going to be solving quadratic equations with the square root method, and this is just a continuation of what we started in class. So this is on page 9 in your packet. We did the first two questions together, and we're going to now finish this up together. This shouldn't take too long. Okay, so anytime we have a quadratic equation, just a quick reminder, a quadratic equation, oops, sorry, my hand's hitting the thing here. A quadratic equation has x squared in it. If we can get x squared alone, where it says x squared equals a number, we can solve this equation by taking the square root on both sides. And so when we take the square root of x squared, we get x equals, don't forget your answer will have plus or minus the square root of your number. And then you have to go ahead and make sure that your answer is simplified, okay, which is what we've been working on the last video and in class. So let's take a look at this example here. X squared equals 21. So if we want to get x alone, we're going to go ahead and take the square root on both sides. Since x squared is alone, we're allowed to do that. So we're going to take the square root on both sides. The square root of x squared is x equals plus or minus. You have to remember to write down the plus or minus symbol because the answer could be positive or negative. Remember, a quadratic equation with an exponent of 2 is going to have two answers. Okay, so the answers are positive and negative. Square root of 21. And then we have to simplify the square root of 21. Perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and I'm going to stop there. What goes into 21? On this list, the only thing that goes into 21 is 1. But if we get 1, we're not going to use it because it's not going to change the value. So this problem is done. This is the answer to the problem. So x could be the square root of 21, or x could be negative square root of 21. Both of those answers are acceptable. Both of those answers are correct. So this has two answers. Let's do number 4. For number 4, again, because we have a squared alone, we have the variable squared alone, we can take the square root on both sides. Square root of a squared is a equals plus or minus. Anytime you have an equation and you take a square root, you're going to put plus or minus. In this case, we can take the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we get 2, and the square root symbol goes away. So again, this means a could be 2, or that a could be negative 2, and that will work. Sorry about that. That will work no matter what you plug in. So, get my pen back here. No matter what you plug in either of those values, you will get the correct answer. So let's just go ahead and double check this answer and see if this is going to actually work. So I just want you to see how this will work. So if a squared has to equal 4 and we plug in 2, we get 2 squared equals 4 and 4 equals 4. So that checks out. Now if we want to plug in negative 2, it's a little bit different. So a squared equals 4. When we plug in negative 2, we need parentheses. So negative 2 squared equals 4, and negative 2 squared, so negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. So see how both of these solutions check out. That means both of these numbers are solutions. And you can write the solution either of these two ways that you like. And actually, you can write your solution with squiggly brackets like this too, because it is a set of numbers, and you'll see coming up soon that we will have to write our solution like that in certain situations. All right, let's do another one. Number 5. So the tricky thing about number 5 is that x squared is not alone. So we're going to start by getting x squared alone, and we're going to minus 8 on both sides. So this is just like getting x alone, except it says x squared. So we're going to get x squared equals, notice that the 8's cancel out, and 28 minus 8 is 20. Okay, now that x squared is alone, we can go ahead and take the square root on both sides. So I'm going to get a new color so you can see the difference here. So we're going to get a square root on both sides. And so the square root of x squared is x equals plus or minus. 20 is not a perfect square, so we're going to keep it as the square root of 20. Now we're going to go ahead and simplify 20. So we're going to have plus or minus, and here's our perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, and that's the closest to 20 that we get. So the perfect square, there's only one that goes into 20, is 4. So we split this up into two radicals. We put the perfect square here, and it goes in 5 times. So x is equal to plus or minus, the square root of 4 is 2, so 2 radical 5. So x could be 2 radical 5, or x could be negative 2 radical 5. Those are the two solutions. Okay, look at number 6. So for number 6, we need to start by dividing to get the variable alone. So to get n squared alone, we're going to divide by 2, since that's 2 times n squared. And we're going to get n squared equals negative 72. Now that n squared is alone, let's take the square root on both sides. And so n equals, and hopefully you recognize there's a problem here. You cannot take the square root of a negative number because you cannot multiply something by itself and get a negative. So this actually has no solution. So you cannot take the square root of a negative number, so that has no solution. Okay, notice that's only going to happen if you have a negative under the radical. Okay, so you might want to make a little note of that here. Okay, negative under radical means there's no solution. Okay, but that's the only time there's no solution. Okay, so the last two examples are a little bit more tricky here because what we have is parentheses squared. But remember earlier we talked about how the square root of x squared gives us x. So when we take the square root of anything squared, that's what we're going to get as well. So if I take the square root of anything squared, I end up with just the thing that's in the parentheses. I can put anything in this parentheses and this is going to work. So up here, we're going to take the square root on both sides. And so the square root and the exponent cancel out and the binomial comes down. X plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 25 is 5. So now we have that. So now what you might want to do is to split this up into two separate problems. We're going to split this up into x plus 1 equals positive 5 and x plus 1 equals negative 5. And now we're going to solve these two equations separately. So for this equation, we're going to minus 1 on both sides, so x equals 4. We also have to minus 1 here, but we get a different solution. So minus 1 on both sides and x equals negative 6. Okay, so here's a situation where the squiggly brackets make sense to list our solutions as if a list of answers, because they're both x, so 4 comma negative 6. And you have to have squiggly brackets, so keep that in mind. Okay, so we were able to take the square root and get the binomial alone and then split it into two separate solutions. Let's look at one more. In this case, we need to get the binomial alone first. So we're going to take this 3 and add it to both sides. All right, so let's add 3 to both sides. Plus 3, plus 3. So now I have x minus 2 in parentheses squared equals 23. Okay, now that I have the binomial alone, I can take the square root on both sides. And I'm left with the binomial, the square root cancels out the exponent only, equals plus or minus, 23 is not a perfect square, so I'm going to leave it as radical 23. Now the next thing to do is to simplify the square root of 23. Okay, but here's our perfect squares, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. None of these numbers go into 23, so this is simplified. We're going to leave it as it is. Okay, now the next thing we need to do, we can split it into two separate answers, or we can just add 2 to both sides. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's add 2 to both sides, and we're going to get x equals, so this is 2, plus or minus the square root of 23, and that's how you write the answer. You should always write the whole number first, and then the radical part next. So this right here would be the solution to the equation. Okay, so the solution is 2 plus the square root of 23 or 2 minus the square root of 23. Okay, so if you wanted to write that as two separate solutions, you would write that like this, and you can write this in the set notation as well. So there's a couple different ways to show your answer. Don't really worry about how you show your answer, just worry about how to get the right answer. All right, so I hope this was helpful. That finishes up page 9. We'll do more practice with this next class. I'll see you then.